A poor black boy from the projects claiming his father runs a billion-dollar empire. Mrs. Garcia didn't just reject Marcus Thompson's essay about his hero father. She ripped it to shreds and tossed the pieces to the floor. At this elite prep school, Marcus's skin and second-hand clothes made him an easy target. Labeled a liar, a nobody, pushed to believe he deserved nothing more than shame and poverty. But just as the world decided his fate, everything was about to change. Because his father was coming, and when he walked through those doors, this entire school would wish they'd never touched his son. The assignment was simple: write about a hero in your life. In Mrs. Agatha Garcia's AP English classroom at Westbridge Academy, nothing was ever simple. Mrs. Garcia sat behind her mahogany desk like a queen on a throne, her pearl necklace gleaming, her eyes scanning for weakness. "Preston," Mrs. Garcia said, her voice dripping with approval, "share your essay first." Preston Whitmore stood up with casual confidence. He read about his father's hedge fund, using buzzwords. "It lacks soul." When he finished, Mrs. Garcia beamed. "Excellent, Preston. A+. Marcus Thompson." Garcia's voice turned to ice. "You're next." Marcus stood, smoothing the paper in his hands. "My hero is my father, David Thompson," Marcus began, his voice clear. "CEO of Thompson Industries. He built a tech empire worth $3 billion from a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. He didn't inherit wealth. He created it." A few students whispered. Preston scoffed. Mrs. Garcia's eyebrows shot up. "Stop," Mrs. Garcia said sharply. Marcus froze. Garcia stood, her heels clicking. She stopped inches from Marcus's desk, her gaze sliding over his worn Nikes, his faded jeans. "Marcus, this is creative writing, not fantasy fiction," Garcia said. "It's not fantasy, Mrs. Garcia. It's the truth." "The truth?" Garcia laughed coldly. She turned to the class. "Billionaire CEOs don't live in the projects. Their children don't wear second-hand clothes to school. They certainly don't look like you." The insult hung heavy. "My father believes in humility," Marcus said. "He doesn't need to show off." "Enough," Garcia snapped. "It's pathetic, Marcus. To stand here and claim a billion-dollar empire, it's insulting." "I'm not lying," Marcus said. Garcia snatched the paper from Marcus's hands violently. "This is an insult to this institution." Then she ripped it. Once, twice, again and again. The pieces fluttered onto Marcus's desk like dead leaves. "You will rewrite this assignment," Garcia declared. "Write about something real. Your mother's struggles. The reality of your neighborhood. Don't appropriate the lives of your betters." Marcus sat paralyzed, heart-hammering. The injustice burned. He didn't cry. He refused to give her that satisfaction. The bell rang. Students scrambled out. Marcus waited until the room emptied before gathering the pieces. A shadow fell over his desk. Preston Thorne stood there. "Billionaire CEO." Preston chuckled. "You should have aimed lower, Thompson. Maybe a manager at McDonald's. At least that will be believable for your demographic." He raised his expensive loafer and deliberately stepped on the torn paper, grinding his heel into the word hero before walking away. By lunch, the story had mutated into legend. Preston sat at the center table, holding court. "It's actually sad," Preston said loudly. "My dad's firm looked into it. There's no Thompson Industries. His mom cleans houses in our neighborhood. The kid's delusional." The lie played perfectly into existing prejudices. Across the cafeteria, Marcus sat alone. He had his back to the wall, head bowed over a textbook. He felt the eyes on him, felt the weight of whispers. Preston watched him from across the room. He hated Marcus because he was calm. Even after Garcia destroyed his essay, even after the school laughed, Marcus sat there with dignity. Preston stood up. The cafeteria quieted instantly. He grabbed a carton of chocolate milk and walked slowly toward Marcus's table. Marcus didn't look up until Preston's shadow fell across his book. "Can I help you?" His voice was steady. "Just checking on the charity case," Preston said, smiling. "Heard about your dad, the billionaire." "My father is real, Preston. More real than your manners," Marcus replied. The nearby table gasped. Preston's smile twitched. You have a big mouth for someone who doesn't belong here. You pollute this place with your lies. He opened the milk carton and poured. The chocolate liquid cascaded down, splashing onto Marcus's head, soaking his hair, running down his face. Marcus sat frozen. Discipline. Don't engage. Oops, Preston said. Slip. He waited for tears, for screams. But Marcus didn't break. He took a napkin, wiped his eyes, stood up. Is that all, Preston? Or does your father need to buy you a bigger audience? The silence was absolute. Preston's face turned red. Get out of my face, Preston hissed. Before I make you. Marcus walked past him with measured steps. He walked out through the double doors. Marcus held his breath until he reached the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face. A CEO's son doesn't cry, he whispered. Then he saw it, written across the mirror in red lipstick. Go home, liar. But everything Marcus endured wasn't enough for Preston. The locker room hummed with chaos. Around Marcus was a 3-foot radius of silence. 3 rows away, Kyle fumbled with his gym bag, hands shaking. In his palms sat Preston's platinum Rolex. 10 minutes ago, Preston had shoved it into Kyle's hand. Plant it, Preston ordered. Kyle waited until Marcus turned away. In that split second, Kyle brushed past Marcus's open backpack. The watch slid deep into the front pocket. 2 minutes later, the locker room door swung open. Mrs. Garcia stood in the doorway. Nobody leaves, Garcia announced. We have a report of theft. Marcus Thompson, Garcia said, walking straight toward him. Empty your bag. Why? Because Preston Thorne is missing his watch. That's a lie, Marcus said calmly. I haven't been near his locker. Give me the bag or I call the police right now. Marcus handed it over. Garcia went straight to the front pocket. She pulled out the Rolex. The locker room gasped. I didn't put that there, Marcus said immediately. Mrs. Garcia, I didn't take that. Someone planted it. Garcia looked at the watch, then at Marcus. In that moment, she saw a ghost from 30 years ago, the young black woman who had worked in her husband's office, the woman her husband had left her for. Garcia projected all that decades-old bitterness onto the child before her. Of course you didn't, Garcia whispered, voice trembling with rage. You people come into our schools, acting like you own the place. But deep down, you're all the same. You see something shining you can't afford, and you just have to take it. I don't want his watch, Marcus said. My father taught me that honor is worth more than gold. Your father, Garcia laughed harshly. The imaginary billionaire. You're a fraud, Marcus Thompson. A thief and a liar. Garcia grabbed Marcus's arm. To the principal's office. Now. As Garcia dragged Marcus past the trophy case, he saw Preston leaning against lockers, surrounded by teammates. As Marcus passed, their eyes met. Preston looked at Mrs. Garcia and gave her a slow, deliberate wink. Garcia tightened her grip and gave Preston a barely perceptible nod. This wasn't just bullying. This was coordinated. The platinum Rolex sat on Principal Hayes' desk. The evidence is clear, Marcus. Hayes sighed. We should call the police. Call them, Marcus said. They'll fingerprint the watch. They'll see I never touched it. Hayes paused. We prefer to handle these internally. We need to call your parents. Call my father, Marcus said. David Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries. Hayes dialed. Ring. 1 ring. 2. 5. 10. You've reached Thompson Industries executive line. Please leave a message. Hayes clicked the receiver down. Unavailable again. Marcus, I checked our records. We have no employment verification, just a P.O. box. He travels constantly for business, Marcus said. He's in Singapore this week. Or, Mrs. Garcia spoke, he doesn't answer because he knows what you are. This behavior is textbook. Principal Hayes, the theft, the pathological lying, it all points to the same root cause, a lack of moral foundation in the home, specifically the absence of father figure. Marcus went rigid. They didn't know about the 14-hour days his father worked building his company, about the nights Marcus spent alone because Dad was closing deals. about how his father wore old clothes from valuing substance over appearance. You think you stole that watch because you wanted money? Garcia leaned down. No, you stole it because your father never taught you that you aren't special. He probably wasn't much of a man himself. Something inside Marcus snapped. Marcus shot up from his chair. It toppled backward. Shut up. Marcus screamed. Don't you dare speak of him. He slammed his hands on Hayes's desk. My father built everything from nothing. He's building a future for people like me. Violence. Garcia shrieked. Principal Hayes, you see? The aggression? He's unstable. That's enough. Hayes grabbed his pen. Marcus, your outburst confirms everything Mrs. Garcia reported. You are hereby suspended effective immediately, pending board review for permanent expulsion. He thrust the paper at Marcus. Hand over your student ID. Now. Marcus slowly pulled out his plastic ID card and dropped on the desk. You can keep the card, Marcus whispered, but you'll never destroy who I am. My father is coming, and God help you when he does. Get out, Hayes said, before I call security. Marcus walked out into the midday sun. He was alone. He began the long walk home. He didn't notice the black Range Rover idling at the corner. As Marcus turned onto the deserted shortcut behind the stadium, the car's engine revved. Following him, the Range Rover swerved around the corner, cutting off Marcus's path. 2 more cars blocked the rear. Marcus stopped. No exit. The doors opened. Preston Whitmore stepped out. Going somewhere, thief? Preston asked. I'm going home, Preston, Marcus said. I'm suspended. You won. Isn't that enough? Suspended? Preston laughed. Getting you kicked out is paperwork. That's not winning. Winning is when you learn your place. He pointed to the dirt. Neo. You're pathetic, Marcus said. You have everything. Money, cars, the school, teachers. And yet you're so empty you have to destroy someone with nothing just to feel big. You're not a leader, Preston. You're a bully. Without your daddy's money, you're nothing. The truth hit Preston hard. His face turned red. Shut up, Preston hissed. Does it hurt? Marcus pressed. Does it hurt knowing no matter how many watches you buy, you'll never have honor? That you'll never be half the man my father is? Smack! The slap knocked Marcus off his feet. He crumbled onto gravel, hands scraping stones. He tasted copper from a split lip. Don't you ever compare me to your fake father. Preston screamed. Marcus lay on the ground. He looked up at Preston without crying. He looked with absolute pity. Stop looking at me. Preston kicked Marcus's backpack. Books and paper spilled. Sliding out was a 5x7 photograph of his family. His father in a suit, his mother in a sundress, young Marcus between them. Preston walked to the photo. Look at this, he sneered. A fake CEO and a maid. Trash just like you. He raised his foot and stomped on the photo, grinding his heel into the dirt. Marcus let out a choke sob. He scrambled to save the picture. No, stop it. Marcus looked around desperate for help. On the second floor, a window uncurtained. Standing there holding coffee was Mrs. Garcia. Mrs. Garcia. Marcus screamed, waving his bloody hand. Help! Please help me. Mrs. Garcia didn't move. Through the glass, her face was indifferent. She looked at Preston, then at Marcus kneeling in dirt with a bleeding lip. For 5 agonizing seconds their eyes locked. Garcia's expression hardened. She reached for the blind cord. With a sharp tug, the slat snapped shut. Mrs. Garcia had witnessed felony assault and chose to close the blinds. Preston laughed. See? Nobody cares, Thompson. You're alone. They got back in a Range Rover and sped off, leaving him broken. Marcus crawled to the photo, brushing dirt off his father's face with trembling fingers. Rain began to fall. He curled into a ball, clutching the photo. He closed his eyes, ready to give up, but then he felt it. The ground beneath him began to vibrate. A low hum grew into rhythmic mechanical tremor. From the service road came the deep roar of engines, massive ones. The cavalry was here. The main courtyard of Westbridge Academy on Monday morning. The entire student body and faculty assembled for the flag ceremony. Principal Hayes was at the microphone droning about school spirit. Preston stood with varsity teammates, tossing a football casually. He looked untouchable. Mrs. Garcia stood sipping morning coffee, satisfied. Then the ground began to shake. The guttural growl of heavy engines drowned out the microphone. 3 black Mercedes S-Class sedans rolled through the gates. Flanking them were 2 black SUVs with security lights flashing. The convoy screeched to a halt in precise formation. The doors flew open. 6 men in dark suits and earpieces stepped out. Executive protection, forming a perimeter. Principal Hayes dropped his notes. Students were frozen. The rear door of the center Mercedes opened. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit emerged. Tall, commanding, radiating power. His shoes alone probably cost more than Preston's Rolex. David Thompson had arrived. He was every inch the billionaire CEO. Salt and pepper hair, perfectly cut. A custom Tom Ford suit. On his wrist, a limited edition Patek Philippe. But his eyes held the steel of someone who clawed his way from nothing to everything. David turned back the car and extended his hand. Marcus Thompson stepped out, wearing a clean polo shirt. But on his face was a purple-blue bruise and butterfly bandage. He took his father's hand. The silence in the courtyard was absolute. Preston's mouth hung open, eyes wide. Mrs. Garcia's ceramic mug slipped from numb fingers and shattered. She stared at the fake billionaire, and he was the most real, terrifying thing she'd ever seen. David stood there, letting the image sink in. He touched the bandage on his son's cheek with his thumb. His expression was profound sorrow. For a second, he wasn't CEO. He was just a dad who hadn't been there to protect his boy. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I held the line, Dad," Marcus whispered back. "I didn't break." "I know you didn't," David said. Then the sorrow vanished. Cold determination descended. The father stepped back. The CEO stepped forward. He turned to the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was commanding. "My name is David Thompson," he announced, "founder and CEO of Thompson Industries, and this is my son, Marcus." He paused. "Yesterday, my son was called a liar in this school. He was humiliated. He was stripped of his dignity. And then, his eyes locked onto the varsity team, he was assaulted." The crowd parted. Students shuffled away from Preston Whitmore, leaving him isolated. David began walking straight toward Preston. Preston tried to stand tall, but his knees betrayed him. He stood alone, shaking. David stopped 12 inches from Preston's face. He towered over the boy. "You like to hit kids?" David asked, voice dangerously quiet. I, Preston stammered. She fell. "I saw the bruise." David cut him off. "And my security team is documenting the injury for the criminal report." Preston's eyes darted around. "My dad is Senator Whitmore." "You can't." David leaned closer. "I know exactly who your father is. You tell the senator that the imaginary billionaire has arrived. Tell him his influence ends where my resources begin." Preston began to hyperventilate. Tears welled in his eyes. "You hurt my son," David continued, voice dropping to a whisper. "You tried to break his spirit because you were too weak to handle his strength. Now you're going to learn about consequences. You, your father, and every adult who watched and did nothing, you're all going to pay." David straightened, looked at Preston with pure disgust, then turned his back. He walked back to Marcus, took his hand, locked down the school immediately. "No one leaves. We're treating this as a crime scene." Principal Hayes cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson," Hayes began, voice wavering. "While I respect your success, you cannot commandeer a private school. We have procedures. This is a civilian matter." David didn't look up from the file. He was reading. Marcus's permanent record. "Principal Hayes, does Westbridge Academy accept federal education grants?" Hayes blinked. "Well, yes, but..." "And do you receive technology funding from the Thompson Foundation?" "I believe so." "Then you are recipient of my foundation's money," David stated flatly. "A hate crime committed against my son on property partially funded by my philanthropy puts you under my scrutiny. Unless you want to call the board and discuss fund withdrawal." Hayes went ashen. "Without that money, the school would collapse." He sank back defeated. "No, sir, That won't be necessary. Good, David said, then remained silent. He turned to Mrs. Garcia. Mrs. Garcia, you destroyed my son's property yesterday. An essay. It was a lie, Garcia said. A fantasy. You didn't know I was a billionaire? David finished. So, in your mind, if I was a janitor or mechanic, my son's words would have no value. Is that your philosophy? I have standards. Did you read it? David asked. He tapped Marcus's laptop. Digital footprints are harder to destroy. I have the backup here. He spun it to face her. Read it. Garcia's hand shook. She began reading aloud, voice weak. My hero is my father. He taught me that success isn't measured by what you have, but by what you build for others. People see the headlines about billion-dollar deals. But I see him in the kitchen at midnight, reviewing proposals to create jobs in neighborhoods like ours. He is my hero not because he's rich, but because he remembers being poor. The room fell silent. Garcia stopped. Shame crept up her neck. She'd expected a story about yachts. Instead, she'd torn up a tribute to humility and service. He wasn't writing about money, Mrs. Garcia, David said softly. He was writing about values, and you mocked him for it. Let's talk about yesterday afternoon behind the bleachers. My son was assaulted. Preston Whitmore struck him, knocked him down. I don't know what you're talking about, Garcia said quickly. I'd left the day. Marcus says he saw you. Second floor window. He says he screamed for help. He says you looked him in the eye and closed the blinds. He's mistaken, Garcia said confidently. Trauma affects memory. I would never ignore a student. I'm a teacher of 23 years. My reputation is spotless. I didn't see anything. David stared at her. You seem very sure. I'm certain. David picked up a manila envelope. When Marcus's phone went offline yesterday, my security team initiated protocol. We pulled footage from our corporate security drone monitoring this sector. He pulled out a high-resolution photograph showing the school from above. This image was time-stamped 3:42 p.m. yesterday. He pointed to the bottom where a boy lay curled behind bleachers. Then he slid his finger up to the building, second floor, third window from left. There, clear as day, was a woman in a tweed suit standing at the window, holding a coffee mug, looking down. That's a distinctive brooch you're wearing today, Mrs. Garcia, David noted. The same one visible here. Garcia looked at the photo. The evidence was undeniable. It was her, caught in 4K resolution. Drone imagery doesn't lie, Mrs. Garcia, David whispered. You watched the boy beat my son and close the blinds. Mrs. Garcia couldn't speak. Blood drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Gentlemen, David said security, please escort Mrs. Garcia off school property and ensure she understands that a police report will be filed. David's team worked through the night. An old janitor named Hayes, former corporate VP who'd lost everything and ended up in maintenance, had been collecting evidence for 2 years. He showed David a trash bag full of Marcus's real grades that Garcia had thrown away, replacing them with failing marks. He had tests showing Marcus's brilliance marked as C-, while Preston's mediocre work received A+. Systematic fraud targeting scholarship students. But Hayes had something better. An old voice recorder. Teacher's Lounge has a vent above the coffee station where Garcia holds court, Hayes explained. He pressed play. I don't care how well he writes. Mrs. Garcia's voice came through. The boy is a problem. If his GPA passes Preston's, the senator will pull funding. We cannot have a scholarship student as valedictorian. Then a man's voice. You know the deal, Agatha. I don't pay you to grade papers. I pay you to curate outcomes. Break his spirit. Destroy his transcript before he steals my son's Yale spot. Senator Charles Whitmore's voice. The next morning, police arrived at Westridge Academy. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from the school's own cameras, recovered from Principal Hayes' hidden drive, showed Preston striking Marcus clear as day. It showed Mrs. Garcia in the window watching, then smiling before closing the blinds. Financial records showed Senator Whitmore had paid Garcia $50,000 through shell companies to rig grades. In the courtroom weeks later, Judge Holloway looked down at Mrs. Agatha Garcia. She looked nothing like the tyrant who'd ruled the English department. You were entrusted with the most sacred duty, the education and protection of children. Instead, you sold that duty for a monthly check. For academic fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to assault, he sentenced her to 5 years in state prison. Furthermore, you are stripped of your teaching license, and your pension is forfeited to pay restitution to the victim. As bailiffs moved to handcuff her, Garcia turned. Her eyes met Marcus's. Marcus sat in the front row, hands folded. He didn't smile or gloat. He simply looked at her with calm, penetrating gaze. It was the look of someone who had survived. Garcia waited for him to curse her, to laugh. But Marcus just nodded once, a small, solemn acknowledgement of the end. The teacher lowered her head, weeping as she was led away. Senator Charles Whitmore came next, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He sat silently as federal marshals read the indictment. Racketeering, bribery, witness intimidation. He'd lost his seat, his reputation, and soon his freedom. Preston received probation and 500 hours of community service. When the gavel fell, Preston let out a breath he'd been holding for years. He walked out not as a varsity star, but as someone finally free from his father's shadow. That afternoon, David and Marcus walked through Arlington National Cemetery. They stopped before a pristine white stone. Captain Elizabeth Thompson, M.D., beloved wife and mother. Marcus knelt in the grass. He placed a framed certificate against the headstone, a letter from the Secretary of Education formally apologizing to the Johnson family and establishing the Elizabeth Thompson Scholarship for Resilience at Westbridge Academy. "I did it, Mom," Marcus whispered, touching the cold marble. "I didn't let them change me." David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You wrote in your essay that honor comes from what you build for others." Marcus stood, brushing grass from his dress. "I was wrong, Dad. Honor isn't just about building. It's about standing. You don't get from money or a trophy. It's what you have left when they try to take everything else away." Mrs. Garcia had a pension and reputation, but she had no honor. Preston had a Rolex, but he had no self-worth. She took her father's hand. "They try to make me feel small because I didn't have their things, but I realized they were the ones who were empty." They turned and walked away. Two figures silhouetted against the setting sun, leaving behind the pain and prejudice. They walked into a future that was uncertain, but one thing was guaranteed. It would be faced with truth. Marcus Thompson's journey reminds us that honor is not something you buy with money, and dignity is not something you inherit with a title. It is a quiet strength to hold your head high when the world tries to force you to your knees. While Mrs. Garcia and Senator Whitmore built their empires on privilege and prejudice, Marcus built his on integrity. His victory wasn't just about a billionaire walking through the door. It was about a son who refused to let lies define his worth. He showed us that truth is the only currency that never devalues, and standing up for yourself is the bravest thing you can do. Remember, hold the line, stand with truth, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong.